The fastest way to lose an argument is to call the people who already know you are wrong. That was the first thought that crossed my mind when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone shouting into a cell phone outside my property. I looked up from the stack of lumber I had just unloaded from the bed of my pickup truck and saw a white sport utility vehicle stopped at the entrance to my private driveway. Standing beside it with one hand pointing directly at me was a woman I recognized immediately. Karen Whitmore, the president of our homeowners association, looked absolutely convinced she had just caught someone breaking the law. "Yes, he is blocking the road," she said loudly into her phone. "He refuses to move his truck, and nobody can get through." I glanced behind her. The public street was completely open. Every mailbox remained accessible. Every neighbor could drive in or out without the slightest problem. The only thing being blocked was my own driveway, because my pickup sat exactly where I had parked it while unloading supplies for a weekend deck repair. I rested another bundle of boards on the ground, checked my watch, and quietly took another sip of coffee from the insulated mug resting on the truck bumper. Karen seemed almost offended that I was not reacting. She expected an argument. She expected excuses. She expected me to panic because she had called 911. Instead, I simply continued unloading my materials while she described the situation in increasingly dramatic terms. "He is preventing access," she insisted. "Someone needs to come immediately." I could hear the dispatcher asking calm questions through the speaker of her phone. "Was anyone injured? No." "Was there an emergency? No." "Was traffic blocked?" Karen answered yes with complete confidence, even though the only vehicle unable to use the driveway was mine, and it belonged to me. I slowly looked toward the small reflective sign mounted beside the stone entrance. "Private drive. Residents and authorized guests only." The sign had stood there for years. Just beyond it, another marker identified the beginning of my property line according to the county survey completed long before our subdivision even existed. Every detail had been documented, recorded, and filed. None of it had ever been questioned until Karen became convinced that my driveway should somehow function as a shortcut for neighborhood convenience. I said nothing because silence often reveals more than an argument ever could. A gentle breeze moved through the oak trees lining the driveway, while afternoon sunlight reflected across the windshield of my pickup. My doorbell camera quietly recorded everything from the front porch. A second camera mounted beneath the garage roof captured a wider angle that included Karen, her vehicle, and the entrance sign. The dash camera inside my truck had automatically begun recording the moment I parked. Every word, every gesture, every passing second was being preserved without anyone needing to raise their voice. Karen ended the call, folded her arms, and smiled with the satisfaction of someone convinced victory was only a few minutes away. "You should have moved your truck when I asked," she said confidently. I looked at my watch one more time before meeting her eyes for the first time since she arrived. "I think it is best if we both wait right here," I replied calmly. The truth usually arrives on time. My name is Daniel Brooks, and if you had driven past my house that afternoon, you would have assumed I was just another homeowner spending a Saturday working on repairs. That was exactly how I preferred it. The old cedar deck behind my house had finally reached the point where replacing a few boards could no longer wait. So I had spent the morning picking up lumber from the local hardware store before backing my pickup into my own driveway to unload everything. My house sat at the end of a quiet private drive that had existed long before the surrounding subdivision was built. The county records were clear. The property survey was clear. Even the stone monument at the entrance marked the beginning of private property. I had never hidden those facts because there was nothing to hide. Most of my neighbors understood exactly where the public road ended and my driveway began. They waved when they passed, respected the posted signs, and went about their day. I appreciated that kind of neighborly relationship because when I was not working, I wanted my life to look as ordinary as everyone else's. Very few people in the neighborhood knew what I did for a living. I never introduced myself by my title because I believed respect should come from character, not a badge. Monday through Friday, I served as the police chief for the county that included our community, but weekends belonged to unfinished home projects, fresh coffee on the porch, mowing the lawn, and enjoying a little peace after long weeks of difficult decisions. My wife often joked that the only uniform most neighbors ever saw me wear was an old baseball cap covered with sawdust. She was right. I liked it that way. The fewer assumptions people made about me, the easier it was to see who they really were. Over the previous year, however, one person had developed an unusual interest in my property. Karen Whitmore had recently become president of the Homeowners Association, and she approached every conversation with complete confidence that every inconvenience could be solved by creating another rule. At first, she questioned the appearance of my mailbox, even though it matched the approved neighborhood design exactly. Later, she suggested that my private driveway should remain available because it offered a convenient shortcut for residents walking between two sections of the subdivision. I politely explained that it was not a shared access road, and I even showed her the county survey when she asked. She smiled, thanked me, and acted as though she understood. A month later, she returned with the same request, this time insisting that several homeowners believed the driveway should remain open whenever possible because it made the neighborhood feel more connected. I respectfully declined again. My answer never changed because the facts never changed. Every conversation ended calmly, and every email she sent received a courteous reply together with copies of the same survey and property documents. Looking back while watching her stand beside my truck with complete certainty that she had finally proven her point, I realized something important. Karen had never been looking for information. She had been looking for agreement. Unfortunately for her, property lines, public records, and the law have never depended on opinion, and neither had I. Karen had a habit of repeating the same sentence whenever someone disagreed with her. The community comes first. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Every neighborhood benefits when people cooperate. The problem was that Karen slowly began redefining what cooperation meant. According to her, cooperation meant saying yes whenever the homeowners association wanted something, even if that request reached beyond its actual authority. A few months before that afternoon, I noticed several temporary directional signs appearing throughout the subdivision. One of them pointed directly toward my private driveway with an arrow labeled Neighborhood Walking Access. I removed the sign because it had been installed on my property without permission. The next morning, another identical sign appeared in the same location. This time I photographed it before carefully placing it beside the association office with a short note explaining that the driveway remained private property according to county records. Karen emailed me later that day, claiming the sign had only been intended as a friendly convenience for residents. I replied with the recorded property survey, copies of the county plat map, and a photograph of the permanent private drive marker already standing at the entrance. She never responded to the documents themselves. Instead, she simply insisted that several neighbors preferred using the driveway because it shortened their walk by a few minutes. I understood the appeal, but convenience had never changed ownership. During the weeks that followed, I quietly noticed more people attempting to use the driveway as though it belonged to everyone. Whenever I happened to be outside, I politely greeted them and explained that the entrance served only my home. Nearly everyone apologized immediately after seeing the posted signs and turned around without complaint. More than once they mentioned that Karen had told them the association expected the driveway to remain available whenever possible. That statement concerned me far more than the extra footsteps. Rather than argue, I documented every conversation in a simple notebook together with dates, photographs, and copies of emails. Years in law enforcement had taught me that accurate records often matter more than strong opinions. Around the same time, I upgraded my existing camera system. The doorbell camera already covered the front entrance, but I added a second high-resolution camera overlooking the driveway entrance and synchronized both with secure cloud storage. My pickup also recorded continuously whenever parked, automatically preserving wide-angle video of the entire approach. None of those improvements were made because I expected a confrontation. They simply reflected habits developed over decades of investigating incidents where clear documentation solved questions before disagreements could grow into larger problems. Looking back, every small decision became another piece of a much larger picture. The survey copies stayed organized inside a weatherproof folder near the garage. The original county plat remained stored inside my home office. Every email with Karen was archived automatically. Even the timestamps from my security cameras synchronized daily with official network time servers. Standing beside my pickup while Karen confidently waited for responding officers, I already knew something she did not. The facts had been quietly collecting themselves for months. By the time the first patrol vehicle appeared at the end of the public road, there would be no mystery about where the street ended, where my property began, or who had mistaken personal opinion for legal authority. The distant sound of approaching patrol vehicles carried through the quiet afternoon long before the flashing lights came into view. Karen folded her arms with obvious satisfaction, convinced that the next few minutes would end exactly the way she had imagined. She glanced toward my pickup, still parked entirely within the boundaries of my private driveway, then back toward me with a confident smile. "I hope you are ready to explain yourself," she said. I simply nodded and continued stacking the last few boards beside the garage. The driveway remained exactly as it had been since she arrived. My truck had never crossed onto the public roadway. The entrance sign still read Private Drive. The county property marker remained fixed beside the stone column at the edge of the pavement. Nothing had changed except the arrival of the patrol cars. They slowed as they reached the entrance before stopping neatly along the public street instead of pulling onto my property. Two uniformed officers stepped out, taking a quick look around with the calm professionalism I appreciated after so many years in law enforcement. One officer spoke with Karen first while the second surveyed the area without saying a word. Karen immediately began explaining that I was blocking access, preventing residents from traveling through the neighborhood, and refusing repeated requests to move my vehicle. She spoke confidently, gesturing toward my driveway as though it were an extension of the public street. The first officer listened carefully without interrupting, occasionally asking short questions while making notes. When Karen finished, both officers slowly turned toward me. I had not moved from beside the stack of lumber. My coffee still rested on the truck bumper, and the tape measure clipped to my belt reminded me that home repairs, not confrontation, had been the only thing on my schedule that afternoon. Before I could say a single word, the younger officer looked directly at me, paused for half a second, and his expression immediately changed from routine professionalism to respectful recognition. He straightened his posture instinctively. "Good afternoon, Chief," he said clearly. His partner turned, recognized me almost instantly, and offered the same respectful greeting. Karen blinked several times as she looked from the officers back to me, obviously trying to understand what she had just heard. I returned the greeting with a polite nod and answered in exactly the same calm tone I used every day at work. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for responding." I deliberately avoided mentioning my position because I wanted the conversation to remain focused on facts rather than titles. The younger officer quietly asked whether I wished to explain the situation. I pointed toward the entrance sign, then toward the county property marker embedded beside the driveway, and finally toward my pickup. "Everything involved is on private property," I said. "The cameras have been recording since before the call was placed, and the county survey documents are available inside the house if you need them." Neither officer reacted with surprise because they already understood the importance of verifying evidence before reaching conclusions. Karen remained silent for the first time since arriving. The confidence that had filled every sentence only minutes earlier slowly gave way to uncertainty as she realized that this was no longer a disagreement based on assumptions. It had become a straightforward review of documented facts, recorded evidence, established property records, and a call for service that would now be evaluated exactly the same way every other report in the county was evaluated, with patience, professionalism, and the truth leading every decision. The officers approached the entrance without rushing to conclusions, exactly as they had been trained to do. One remained with Karen while the other walked with me toward the stone marker identifying the beginning of my property. I opened the weatherproof document case mounted inside the garage and removed certified copies of the county survey, the recorded plat map, and the deed description. Every page had already been organized because I preferred facts to memory whenever property questions arose. The younger officer compared the survey with the marker at the entrance before looking back toward the public roadway. He measured the distance with a laser rangefinder kept in his patrol vehicle and confirmed that my pickup had never extended beyond the private driveway. At the same time, The second officer reviewed the recording from my doorbell camera on the display mounted beside the front porch. The video showed Karen arriving after I had already parked, walking toward my truck, requesting that I move it, and then placing the call to emergency dispatch while standing beside the clearly visible private drive sign. My truck camera provided an even wider angle that included the public street remaining completely open throughout the entire encounter. The officers then requested permission to review the recordings directly from my security system so the original timestamps could be verified. I gladly agreed. Within minutes, they compared the synchronized time records from every camera with the dispatch log generated when the emergency call was received. Each timestamp matched perfectly. Nothing had been edited, interrupted, or altered. Karen quietly watched the review while holding her clipboard against her side. When one officer asked whether she had noticed the private drive sign before making the call, she answered that she believed the homeowners association could still require access because residents occasionally used the driveway as a shortcut. The officer politely explained that neighborhood convenience did not change recorded ownership or create public access where none legally existed. He also reminded everyone present that emergency services depended upon accurate information because dispatch resources had to remain available for genuine emergencies. I appreciated the way he handled the conversation because his focus stayed entirely on education and documented facts rather than embarrassment. After reviewing every document, he returned the survey folder to me and thanked me for keeping such complete records. I simply smiled and told him that careful documentation usually prevents larger problems later. Karen remained unusually quiet as she looked once more toward the entrance sign and then at the survey map resting in my hands. For the first time since arriving, she appeared to realize that every assumption she had relied upon had already been answered by official records long before that afternoon. The entire situation had shifted away from opinions and toward objective evidence. Standing there beneath the afternoon sun, surrounded by survey markers, recorded video, county documents, and professional officers committed to following the facts wherever they led, I realized that the strongest authority in any disagreement is never a title, a loud voice, or even a badge. It is a complete record that allows the truth to speak for itself. After the officers completed their review of the property records and camera footage, the atmosphere changed in a way that had nothing to do with my position and everything to do with verified facts. The younger officer closed the survey folder, handed it back to me, and turned toward Karen with the same calm professionalism he had shown since arriving. He explained that the driveway was entirely private property, that my vehicle had remained within the surveyed boundary at all times, and that the public roadway had never been obstructed. He also noted that the emergency call described a situation that did not match what the responding officers found at the scene. Karen tried to explain that several residents regularly walked or drove across the driveway, and that she believed it functioned as part of the neighborhood. The officer acknowledged her concern but gently reminded her that repeated public use could not change recorded ownership or convert private property into a public road. He pointed toward the permanent entrance sign and the county monument marking the property line before explaining that official records always controlled questions involving access and ownership. Throughout the conversation, I remained silent unless one of the officers asked me a direct question. Years in law enforcement had taught me that speaking only when necessary often allows the truth to become much clearer. The senior officer then asked whether I would be willing to provide digital copies of the security footage and property documents for the incident file. I agreed immediately and transferred the files from my tablet to his department laptop using the secure evidence portal available to every agency in our county. Within a few minutes, the upload confirmation appeared together with the recorded dispatch timeline and the responding officer's preliminary observations. Every piece of evidence aligned perfectly with the others. The dash camera showed my pickup entering the driveway well before Karen arrived. The doorbell camera captured the conversation from beginning to end. The exterior security camera recorded the unobstructed public street throughout the incident. Even the timestamps synchronized precisely with the emergency dispatch log. Nothing relied upon memory because everything had already been documented. Karen quietly watched as the officers completed their report, occasionally looking toward the driveway entrance where the private drive sign stood exactly where it always had. The confidence she displayed earlier had disappeared, replaced by the realization that assumptions become very fragile when measured against objective evidence. Before leaving, The senior officer politely encouraged both of us to direct any future property disagreements through the appropriate civil and homeowners association channels, rather than allowing misunderstandings to escalate into emergency calls. I agreed without hesitation because that had always been my preference. Karen nodded as well, although she avoided looking directly at me. As the patrol vehicles prepared to leave, the younger officer thanked me for keeping such organized records and remarked that careful documentation often resolved situations more effectively than lengthy arguments. I smiled because that simple observation summarized the entire afternoon. The patrol cars pulled away quietly, the neighborhood returned to its usual peaceful rhythm, and I picked up the next bundle of lumber exactly where I had left it. My driveway had never changed. The survey had never changed. The law had never changed. The only thing that changed that afternoon was that everyone finally saw the difference between an opinion and a fact. The incident report became public record a few days later, and that was when the situation began affecting the neighborhood in ways Karen had never expected. Several members of the Homeowners Association board contacted me individually, asking whether I would attend their next meeting to explain exactly what had happened. I accepted the invitation on one condition. I told them I would attend only as a homeowner and property owner, not as the police chief. They agreed immediately because they understood the discussion belonged in the context of neighborhood governance rather than law enforcement. When the evening arrived, nearly every chair inside the clubhouse meeting room was occupied. Many residents had already heard different versions of the story, but very few had actually seen the property records, the survey maps, or the synchronized camera footage. The board president pro tempore opened the meeting by thanking everyone for remaining respectful before inviting me to explain the sequence of events. I placed a single folder on the table containing copies of the county survey, the recorded plat, photographs of the private drive sign, and still images from the security cameras. I never raised my voice because there was no reason to. The documents spoke clearly enough on their own. After reviewing the timeline, one board member asked Karen whether she had ever verified the ownership records before encouraging residents to use the driveway. She admitted that she had relied on assumptions and conversations with neighbors instead of requesting the official survey from the county. Another member asked why she believed an emergency call was necessary when the public roadway remained completely open. Karen quietly answered that she believed immediate intervention would resolve the disagreement more quickly. The room became silent for several long moments as everyone considered how a simple misunderstanding had grown into an unnecessary emergency response. Then something unexpected happened. One homeowner stood and explained that he had also been told the driveway was available for public use. Another family shared that they had begun walking through the entrance because they assumed the homeowners association had already received permission. None of them intended to disrespect private property. They had simply trusted information that was never confirmed. That realization shifted the entire conversation away from blame and toward accountability. The board voted unanimously to commission updated community maps clearly identifying every private drive, common area, and public roadway within the subdivision. They also approved a policy requiring any future statements about property ownership to be verified through county records before being distributed to residents. Karen voluntarily stepped away from her leadership responsibilities while the board reviewed internal procedures and selected interim leadership. As the meeting ended, several neighbors stopped to apologize for unknowingly using my driveway over the previous months. I thanked them for coming forward and assured them that my concern had never been with honest mistakes. My concern had always been with decisions made without confirming the facts first. Walking back to my pickup beneath the quiet evening sky, I realized the most meaningful victory had nothing to do with recognition, authority, or titles. It came from watching an entire community choose documentation over assumptions, respect over convenience, and truth over speculation, because those choices protect neighborhoods far better than arguments ever will. During the weeks that followed, the changes within the neighborhood became impossible to miss. The temporary signs directing residents toward my driveway disappeared, replaced by updated community maps reviewed against official county records before distribution. New information packets explained the difference between common areas, public streets, easements, and privately owned property using language that every homeowner could easily understand. Instead of relying on assumptions passed from one neighbor to another, people finally had accurate information available from the beginning. I appreciated that change because misunderstandings often grow where facts are absent. One Saturday morning, I was finishing another section of the deck renovation when two members of the association board stopped by with a survey company representative. They asked whether I would mind confirming the location of the existing property markers while the updated neighborhood maps were being finalized. I gladly agreed. We walked the entire length of the driveway together, comparing the county survey with the original monuments that had remained in place for years. The surveyor smiled after completing his measurements and remarked that everything matched the recorded plat with remarkable precision. Hearing those words felt strangely satisfying because they confirmed what the documents had shown from the very beginning. Nothing about the property had ever been unclear. Only the assumptions surrounding it had changed. Later that afternoon, several neighbors walking past the entrance waved before continuing along the public sidewalk instead of turning onto the driveway. A few even stopped to compliment the new deck and laugh about how much easier it was now that the community maps clearly identified every roadway and private entrance. Those simple conversations reminded me that most disagreements are not caused by bad people. They are caused by incomplete information repeated often enough to sound true. Karen remained respectful throughout the remainder of the review process. She no longer attended board meetings in a leadership role, but she cooperated fully with the transition and publicly acknowledged that official records should always come before personal interpretation. I respected that decision because accepting responsibility requires far more character than refusing to admit a mistake. The newly elected association president contacted me several days later and asked whether I would review the draft policy describing how future questions involving property boundaries should be handled. I agreed as a homeowner rather than as a public official. Together we suggested language encouraging residents to consult county records before making assumptions about ownership, easements, or access rights. The final version emphasized communication, documentation, and respectful conversation instead of unnecessary conflict. Reading the finished policy, I realized the entire experience had produced something genuinely positive for everyone involved. A misunderstanding that began beside my driveway had ultimately improved how the entire neighborhood approached property rights and community responsibility. As the evening sun settled behind the trees lining the entrance, I parked my pickup in exactly the same place where everything had started weeks earlier. The driveway looked exactly as it always had. The private drive sign remained firmly in place, and the quiet neighborhood carried on around it. This time, however, every person passing by understood exactly where the public road ended and private property began, and that shared understanding was worth far more than winning any single argument. Autumn slowly settled over the neighborhood, and with it came the kind of quiet routine I had always hoped would define life there. Every Saturday morning I backed my pickup into the same driveway, unloaded whatever project happened to be waiting, and enjoyed a cup of coffee while watching the sunlight filter through the oak trees that lined the entrance to my property. Nothing about the driveway had changed since the afternoon Karen placed that emergency call. The survey markers remained exactly where county crews had installed them years before. The private drive sign still greeted every visitor at the entrance. The cameras continued recording quietly in the background, not because I expected another dispute, but because good habits never become unnecessary simply because one problem has been solved. The biggest difference was the attitude of the neighborhood itself. Residents no longer viewed property boundaries as obstacles or inconveniences. They understood them as part of respecting one another. Families walking through the subdivision now followed the public sidewalk that curved naturally around my property, often waving as they passed. Children rode their bicycles along the street without anyone suggesting shortcuts through private driveways. New homeowners received updated welcome packets containing accurate community maps, verified property information, and clear explanations of association authority. Those simple changes prevented confusion long before it could become conflict. Several months after the incident, the newly elected association president invited me to speak briefly during a community workshop focused on neighborhood communication. I accepted because the conversation was never about my profession or the events of one afternoon. It was about the value of verifying information before acting on assumptions. Standing before my neighbors, I held up a copy of the county survey that had quietly resolved everything. I explained that documents, photographs, recordings, and respectful conversations often accomplish far more than arguments ever can. When I finished, the room remained silent for a moment before several homeowners thanked me for approaching the entire situation with patience instead of anger. Their comments meant more than they probably realized because patience had been the lesson my career taught me long before that afternoon ever happened. As police chief, I had learned that authority earns respect only when it is exercised with restraint, fairness, and humility. Those same principles mattered just as much when standing in my own driveway wearing work boots instead of a uniform. Looking back, I realized the badge never changed the outcome. Had I been any other homeowner with the same survey, the same recordings, and the same property records, the facts would have led to the same conclusion. That realization brought me genuine satisfaction because justice should never depend upon who someone is. It should depend upon what can be proven. One quiet evening, as the automatic porch lights illuminated the entrance and my pickup rested in its familiar place, I looked toward the stone marker at the edge of the driveway and smiled. It represented more than a property line. It represented the importance of knowing where rights begin, where responsibilities end, and why both deserve equal respect. The neighborhood had become stronger not because someone won an argument, but because everyone chose to trust verified facts instead of assumptions. Every survey, every camera, every email, every recorded conversation, and every calm decision had quietly pointed toward the same ending. The truth had never needed to speak loudly because it had been standing in plain sight from the very beginning, patiently waiting for everyone else to notice it.